Here's an expanded 1,400-word explanation of Part 1 in simple, interesting English. The Illyrians had lived on their planet Lithera for thousands of years. Their world was beautiful, full of towering crystal cities, glowing forests, and rivers that shimmered with colors unknown to most of the galaxy. They were a peaceful civilization, focused on science, art, and exploration rather than war. The Illyrians had always believed that their planet would provide everything they needed, that their knowledge and careful planning could protect them from anything, but nothing in their history could have prepared them for what was happening now. It began with a series of small tremors deep beneath the planet's surface. At first, they were barely noticeable, like the faint hum of a distant engine. The Illyrian scientists monitored the situation, thinking it was a minor tectonic disturbance, nothing serious. But soon the tremors grew stronger, shaking cities, cracking buildings, and sending panicked citizens running into the streets. The Illyrians' technology, usually so reliable, could not stabilize the disturbances. Their sensors detected massive shifts in the planet's core, movements so large and unpredictable that even the most advanced calculations could not fully understand them. It was a disaster far beyond anything they had imagined. The leaders of Lithera called emergency meetings in the Grand Hall of Crystals, a vast chamber where light passed through the walls, refracting into rainbow patterns across the floors. Scientists, engineers, and policymakers gathered together, all trying to find a solution. Every possible method to stabilize the planet was examined, every theory debated. But each idea seemed to lead to the same terrifying conclusion: their world was dying. If something drastic was not done, Lithera would collapse in a matter of weeks, maybe even days. Fear spread through the population, though the Illyrians were known for their calm and rational demeanor. Families stayed close, helping each other survive small tremors and preparing shelters for the worst. Schools were closed and public gatherings ceased as the threat grew more obvious. The citizens watched the skies at night, hoping for signs, any sign that help might come. The elders, the wisest among the Illyrians, reminded everyone that history had shown them the importance of preparation, resilience, and seeking aid when needed. And now it seemed they would need help from far beyond their star system. It was in this desperate moment that the idea of the ancient distress beacon came forward. The beacon was a relic from an age-long past, built by the ancestors of the Illyrians who had once faced a galactic threat and survived only because of assistance from powerful allies. The beacon was not a simple call for help. It was a signal designed to reach the farthest corners of the galaxy, to summon civilizations that were known for unmatched strength and efficiency. Few beings dared to respond to the beacon, because the ones it called were not ordinary allies. They were the Deathworlders. The Deathworlders were infamous across countless star systems. Stories of their fleets had circulated for centuries, terrifying other civilizations. They were known for conquering hostile planets, surviving environments that would kill almost anything, and possessing weapons of immense destructive power. No one ever underestimated them, and few tried to communicate with them willingly. But in times of extreme desperation, the Deathworlders had been known to intervene, though always on their own terms, and often at a cost that many civilizations could not imagine. The Illyrians had no choice. If they wanted to survive, they had to use the beacon. Its activation required a precise sequence of energy flows and crystal resonance, something only the Illyrians' best scientists could manage. It was risky. Activating the beacon could draw the Deathworlders' attention in ways that might be dangerous, even if the intent was purely to ask for help. Still, the alternative was worse. The planet's core was destabilizing faster than predicted. Mountains began to crack, rivers boiled from heat seeping up from underground, and storms of unprecedented intensity tore across cities. Time was running out. On the night the beacon was activated, the Illyrians gathered in the central plaza. They had decided that if the worst came, they would face it together. Families held hands, eyes full of fear but also hope. The elders began chanting an ancient prayer for protection, a tradition passed down through generations. Then, with the precision of countless practiced hands, the scientists channeled energy through the crystalline circuits, each resonance tuned to perfection. A beam of pale blue light shot up into space, piercing the dark void and stretching farther than the eye could see. It was the SOS signal, a call that could not be ignored by the strongest beings in the galaxy. As the signal traveled, the Illyrians watched anxiously. Weeks of panic and sleepless nights had taken their toll, but this moment was different. There was a sense of hope, fragile but undeniable. The light pulsed and flickered as if alive, carrying with it not just the message of danger but also a plea for mercy. The Illyrians hoped more than anything that anyone would answer their desperate call. They did not know what the Deathworlders would be like or how they would respond. All they knew was that this might be their only chance to survive. Deep in the void, far beyond the Illyrian stars, the signal reached distant systems. It traveled faster than any starship, moving across light years in a matter of hours until it reached the territories controlled by the Deathworlder fleets. Within their massive command ships, the leaders of the Deathworlders intercepted the signal. Their eyes, accustomed to scanning for threats and opportunities, studied the pulse of light and the energy pattern. For a moment there was silence. The Deathworlders rarely acted on emotion or impulse. They calculated, evaluated, and only then made decisions. But this signal was unique. It carried the weight of a civilization's entire existence, a genuine SOS that could not be ignored. Back on Lithera, the Illyrians waited. Days passed in a tense blur. Every rumble of the ground, every flash of lightning, and every distant eruption made hearts race. They debated constantly. What if the Deathworlders were hostile? What if they came and demanded payment or control? Yet, despite their fears, the beacon had been sent. There was no turning back now. They could only hope that the legends were true, that the Deathworlders could respond in time to save their world. Then, on a quiet evening, a shadow appeared on the edges of Lithera's orbit. Illyrians looked up in disbelief. Massive ships, dark and imposing, slowly entered their system, their forms almost too large to comprehend. The sky seemed to darken as thousands of vessels took position, surrounding the planet in a formation that radiated power. The fleet was unlike anything the Illyrians had ever imagined. Their initial fear surged. They were not looking at friendly explorers or merchants. They were witnessing the arrival of the mightiest warriors in the galaxy. But even as awe and terror gripped them, the Illyrians noticed something remarkable. The ships did not attack. They did not fire lasers or missiles. Instead, they hovered with precise coordination, scanning the planet and its inhabitants. There was a strange energy about the fleet, a sense that these beings, for all their fearsome reputation, were here for a purpose that aligned with the Illyrians' survival. The scientists, still trembling from exhaustion and stress, realized that their SOS had worked. Against all odds, the beacon had summoned help. Not just help, but the most powerful force in the known universe. As the first part of this incredible saga ended, the Illyrians understood that their fate had changed. The threat to their planet was still very real, and the ground continued to shake beneath them. But now they were not alone. Something vast, unstoppable, and terrifyingly powerful was watching over them. For the first time in days, hope returned, not as a whisper but as a tangible presence. The Illyrians had reached out into the darkness of space, and somehow the universe had answered. Here's an expanded 1,400-word explanation of Part 2 in simple, interesting English, following your instructions. The Illyrians had never seen anything like it. The Deathworlder fleet hovered in the sky above Lithera, vast and dark, their silhouettes stretching across the horizon, making the Illyrians feel both awe and fear. The ships were immense, far larger than anything their civilization had ever built, their surfaces bristling with weapons and technologies that were beyond comprehension. Even from a distance, the energy radiating from the fleet seemed to bend light itself, casting shadows that danced over the Illyrian cities below. It was clear that these were not ordinary beings. The Deathworlders were legends of power, feared across galaxies, and now they were here, summoned by a desperate SOS. At first, the Illyrians could not understand the intentions of these newcomers. Every story they had ever heard about the Deathworlders emphasized destruction, domination, and conquest. Civilizations that encountered them without warning rarely survived, and the tales of those that did often ended in tragedy. Yet despite their terrifying presence, the fleet remained stationary, moving with a silent precision that suggested calculation rather than aggression. It was as if they were assessing the planet itself, the cities, and even the citizens, before deciding what to do next. Illyrian scientists and leaders rushed to the observation towers, their instruments struggling to measure the magnitude of the fleet. Every sensor they had could barely comprehend the size, energy output, and weapon systems of the Deathworlder ships. Some of the younger Illyrians watched in wide-eyed fascination, feeling a strange mix of fear and excitement. The older generations, however, remembered the old stories, warnings passed down for centuries. These beings did not respond to ordinary signals. They did not offer aid freely. And yet here they were, hovering above the Illyrian world, answering the call. The fleet's arrival changed the very rhythm of life on Lithera. The skies, once filled with soft, luminescent clouds and peaceful orbits of satellites, were now dominated by the colossal warships. Their presence affected the planet's atmosphere slightly, creating subtle gravitational shifts and energy fluctuations that the Illyrians could detect. While the planet itself continued to shake from the destabilized core, there was now a strange sense of order. The Deathworlder's presence imposed a calm discipline on the chaos, as if they had already begun stabilizing the environment in ways the Illyrians could not yet see or understand. Communication with the fleet was impossible at first. The Deathworlders did not respond to the Illyrians' conventional attempts at signals, and their ships did not display markings or lights that suggested friendliness. Yet the Illyrians could sense that the fleet was observing them carefully. Every movement, every decision, and every tremor of the planet was being monitored. The Illyrians realized that this was not a simple rescue mission. The Deathworlders were evaluating them, testing in ways they could not yet comprehend. It was terrifying because any misstep could provoke a force capable of destroying Lithera in moments. Despite the fear, curiosity began to grow among the Illyrians. They watched as the fleet organized itself into intricate formations, moving silently with a precision that no Illyrian technology could match. It was like a living organism, thousands of ships acting as one mind. Some of the scientists hypothesized that the fleet structure was part of a defensive mechanism, designed to protect rather than attack. Others worried that this was only the beginning, that the Deathworlders would soon demand obedience or resources in exchange for their help. The uncertainty made the citizens anxious, but it also filled them with a strange, almost reverential awe. As the days passed, the Illyrians began to notice small changes in the environment. The tremors of the planet seemed slightly less violent, though still dangerous. Volcanic activity slowed in certain regions, and areas that had been on the verge of collapse remained surprisingly stable. The Illyrians speculated that the fleet might be using technology beyond their understanding to intervene in the planet's core indirectly. Some engineers attempted to analyze the energy patterns around the ships, but their instruments failed repeatedly. The fleet's technology was advanced beyond imagination, yet they had arrived in response to a plea for help. That thought both reassured and terrified the Illyrians. Fear and fascination were not the only emotions. Among the citizens, whispers of hope began to circulate. Children, who had been confined to shelters due to the ongoing tremors, peered out at the enormous vessels, imagining heroes from stories beyond their world. Elders quietly reminded everyone that their ancestors had once survived crises by seeking help and making sacrifices. There was an unspoken understanding that the Deathworlders' presence could mean survival, but only if the Illyrians followed certain rules they had yet to learn. The leaders of Lithera were determined to make contact. A council of scientists, diplomats, and strategists convened in the Grand Hall of Crystals. They debated the best approach to communicate with the fleet. Direct messages had failed, and no Illyrian technology seemed capable of reaching the ship's command centers. Finally, one scientist proposed a daring method, using the planet's own energy grid to transmit a harmonized resonance that mirrored the SOS signal, but carried more information about the Illyrians' situation. It was risky. If the Deathworlders perceived it incorrectly, it could be taken as a threat. But the alternative, inaction, was not an option. The procedure began at dawn. Illyrian engineers synchronized massive crystal arrays across the planet, channeling energy into the sky. The process took hours, during which the citizens watched silently, hearts pounding with anticipation. When the final harmonic resonance was transmitted, the fleet responded almost immediately. Ships shifted positions, forming a circular formation around the central city. A low hum vibrated through the atmosphere, felt in bones and stones alike. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained ear, but it carried a powerful message. The Deathworlders had acknowledged the communication. They were ready to engage not as enemies but as observers and potential allies. Even with this acknowledgement, fear did not leave the Illyrians. They knew the legends too well. The Deathworlders did not offer help lightly, and their methods were often harsh. The Illyrians would have to prove themselves worthy, demonstrate intelligence, courage, and resourcefulness. Yet the sense of possibility was undeniable. For the first time since the tremors began, there was a glimmer of hope that Lithra might survive. The presence of the fleet, terrifying as it was, had changed the rules of the game. Citizens began to prepare for the next stage. Emergency shelters were reinforced, supply lines were organized, and scientists began mapping the most unstable regions of the planet. Simultaneously, there was a growing curiosity about the Deathworlders themselves. What kind of beings were capable of such immense power? How did they survive in environments that would destroy other species? And most importantly, what would they require in exchange for their help? These questions hung in the air like an electric charge, adding tension and anticipation to every moment. For the Illyrians, the arrival of the Deathworlder fleet marked a turning point. They were no longer alone in their struggle against the collapsing planet, but the presence of such overwhelming power was also a constant reminder of their vulnerability. They had reached out into the vast darkness of space, and now the universe had responded, not with gentle aid, but with a force that demanded respect, courage, and careful action. The next days would define their survival, their resilience, and their ability to work with beings far beyond their understanding. And so, the Illyrians watched, waited, and prepared. The tremors continued, the skies shifted, and the massive silhouettes of the Deathworlder ships moved like silent sentinels above them. Fear and hope intertwined, creating an electric tension that could be felt in every corner of Lithra. The citizens, scientists, and leaders alike understood one thing. Their planet's fate was no longer theirs alone. The mightiest fleet in the known galaxy had arrived, summoned by a desperate call, and everything that happened next would test their courage, ingenuity, and the very essence of who they were as a civilization. The Illyrians could only hope that the SOS had summoned not just power, but wisdom. They had asked for help, and now the universe was listening. Here's a 950-word explanation of Part 3 in simple and engaging English. Following your instructions, after the Deathworlder fleet arrived over Lithra, the Illyrians understood that the real challenge was only beginning. The fleet's presence was not just a sign of help, it was also a test. These alien beings were legendary across the galaxy for their immense strength, intelligence, and strict standards. Every action the Illyrians took, every decision, and every reaction was observed. Citizens, leaders, and scientists all felt the pressure. Survival depended not just on the planet's stabilization, but also on how well the Illyrians could adapt, work together, and respond under extreme pressure. At first, the fleet remained silent. The ships moved in precise formations, thousands of vessels acting as if controlled by a single mind. Their immense size and energy affected the planet's atmosphere, creating strange lights and subtle shifts in gravity. Citizens stared in awe, unable to comprehend such power. Scientists rushed to study the fleet, analyzing energy signatures and trying to understand their purpose. Despite their best efforts, the technology was far beyond Illyrian understanding. It became clear that survival would require more than intelligence. It would require courage, teamwork, and the ability to think quickly in dangerous situations. The first test from the fleet was observation. The Deathworlders watched how the Illyrians reacted under stress. Scientists were monitored as they stabilized dangerous regions. Leaders were observed making difficult evacuation decisions, and citizens' reactions to crises were noted. Panic, hesitation, courage, and ingenuity were all measured. The Illyrians realized that the fleet was not evaluating strength or weapons. It was evaluating character, intelligence, and the ability to work together. With this understanding, the Illyrians changed their approach. The planet's tremors, volcanic eruptions, and other dangers were no longer just threats. They became opportunities to demonstrate resourcefulness and courage. Communities organized emergency teams to coordinate evacuations and repairs. Scientists collaborated more closely than ever, sharing knowledge to predict and prevent disasters. Leaders carefully considered each decision, balancing immediate safety against long-term survival. Citizens understood that every choice mattered, and that their actions were being silently evaluated by the fleet. The Deathworlders soon increased the difficulty of the challenges. Controlled disturbances appeared in specific regions, testing the Illyrians' ability to respond. Sudden energy storms threatened cities, while volcanic eruptions sent molten rock toward populated areas. These were not random events, they were trials designed to push the Illyrians' abilities to the limit. Citizens had to think creatively, act quickly, and coordinate effectively. The combination of alien observation and natural disasters forced them to evolve and adapt faster than ever before. Bravery became as important as intelligence. Citizens faced life-or-death decisions, evacuating families, rescuing strangers, or risking their own lives to stabilize critical areas. The Deathworlders seemed to reward selflessness and strategic thinking. Small acts of courage influenced entire rescue operations and demonstrated that the Illyrians could rise to challenges. Neighborhoods that had been isolated began working together, sharing resources, information, and support. The trials transformed not just individual citizens but the society as a whole. The fleet's presence also offered indirect lessons. By observing its energy flows and precise maneuvers, Illyrian scientists gained insights into advanced principles of energy manipulation and disaster response. Even without direct communication, citizens learned to interpret subtle cues from the fleet, changes in energy patterns, shifts in formation, and timing of interventions. These observations allowed them to improve their own technology and coordinate more effective strategies for stabilizing the planet. Trust was critical. The Illyrians had to trust the fleet's intentions while also relying on their own knowledge and judgment. Mistakes could be fatal, and hesitation could result in disaster. Yet with each successful operation, confidence grew. Citizens began taking calculated risks, rescuing those in danger and reinforcing vulnerable areas. The balance between fear and courage became a defining feature of the Illyrian society, shaping them into a people capable of facing extraordinary threats. As challenges intensified, the Illyrian skills were tested like never before. Energy barriers appeared unpredictably, requiring quick adaptation. Volcanic eruptions and earthquakes struck simultaneously in different regions, testing coordination across vast distances. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, redirecting energy, stabilizing terrain, and maintaining communication networks. Every action had to be precise. Failure in one region could trigger cascading disasters elsewhere. The Illyrians learned to act collectively, make fast decisions, and adapt intelligently under extreme pressure. The psychological impact was profound. Fear remained, but it was tempered by determination and hope. Citizens realized they were not helpless. They were active participants in their survival. The fleet's observation had taught them to anticipate challenges, act selflessly, and make smart decisions. These lessons extended beyond immediate survival. They reshaped values, culture, and society. The Illyrians understood that true strength was measured not just by technology or power, but by courage, intelligence, and unity. A turning point came when multiple disasters struck simultaneously. Energy storms, volcanic eruptions, and tremors threatened several regions at once. Applying everything they had learned, the Illyrians coordinated evacuations, reinforced critical structures, and stabilized dangerous zones using their technology. This achievement proved that they had internalized the lessons of the fleet and could respond independently to complex challenges. By the end of this part, the Illyrians had transformed. They were no longer a civilization defined by fear and vulnerability. They had become resourceful, courageous, and united. The fleet had tested them, guided them, and inspired their evolution. Citizens demonstrated intelligence, bravery, and cooperation, showing that even a peaceful, unassuming species could rise to extraordinary challenges. The experience also left them with new tools and knowledge. They had learned to interpret signals from the fleet, adapt technologies, and coordinate large-scale responses. These skills would help them survive future disasters and advance their civilization. The fleet's presence had been a test, a teacher, and a challenge. The Illyrians had proven themselves capable of rising to the occasion, even under observation by beings far stronger than themselves. As they looked up at the fleet still hovering above, the Illyrians understood its deeper purpose. The Deathworlders had come not just to save the planet but to evaluate, teach, and transform a civilization. Lythra had been given a second chance, but survival required courage, intelligence, and unity. The Illyrians had risen to the challenge and proven themselves worthy of protection. Through these trials, the Illyrians learned lessons that would last generations. They had faced near destruction, adapted under pressure, and collaborated with beings far beyond their comprehension. Their courage, intelligence, and selflessness had been tested, and they had emerged stronger. The fleet left an indelible mark, not just on the planet but on the people themselves. They understood that true strength came from unity, ethical action, and the ability to rise to challenges no matter how overwhelming. By the conclusion of this part, Lithera was no longer just a fragile world. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and growth. The citizens had survived, adapted, and become stronger. The Deathworlder fleet had tested, inspired, and transformed them. The Illyrians learned to face fear, act with courage, and collaborate under pressure. Survival required intelligence, unity, and the willingness to rise to challenges. This period became a defining moment for the Illyrians. They had faced the unimaginable and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united. They had learned to work together, make quick strategic decisions, and act selflessly for the greater good. The Deathworlders' presence had changed them, but the growth had come from within. They were no longer just a civilization at risk. They were a civilization capable of surviving and thriving in a universe filled with extraordinary challenges. Here's a 950-word explanation of Part 4 in simple, engaging English, following your instructions. The situation on Lithera had reached a critical point. After days of chaos, tremors, and disasters, the Illyrians were exhausted, but determined. The Deathworlder fleet still hovered above, massive and silent, its presence both reassuring and intimidating. The citizens realized that the fleet's intervention was not only about immediate survival, it was about teaching them how to face threats they could never have imagined. Every tremor, every collapse, and every dangerous zone was a lesson in courage, intelligence, and unity. At the heart of this phase were the Illyrians, who had taken on leadership and responsibility. Scientists, engineers, and local leaders were working around the clock to stabilize key regions of the planet. They had begun to understand that the Deathworlders' presence was more than just help. It was a challenge to see how capable the Illyrians truly were. In some regions, energy surges from the fleet were actively stabilizing unstable zones, while in others, the Illyrians had to act independently. This balance between alien assistance and self-reliance tested every skill they had. One of the most remarkable developments was how communities began to organize themselves. Previously, many towns and neighborhoods had operated independently, with little coordination. Now citizens were forming emergency teams, sharing information and pooling resources. Communication networks, both old and newly established, were used to monitor dangerous areas and provide guidance. People were learning to trust each other in ways they never had before. Acts of courage and selflessness became common. Strangers helped strangers, families risked their safety for neighbors, and every successful action built confidence across the population. The Deathworlders seemed to push the Illyrians further by creating controlled challenges in specific areas. These included sudden energy surges, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions in zones that were previously stable. Citizens were forced to react quickly, prioritize tasks, and coordinate across vast distances. For example, an eruption near a populated city required both evacuation planning and rapid reinforcement of protective barriers. Scientists worked with engineers to predict the flow of lava and direct it away from inhabited areas, while rescue teams guided civilians to safety. Every successful response demonstrated the Illyrians' growing competence and resilience. Leadership during these events became critical. Illyrian leaders had to make fast, sometimes life-or-death decisions. Should they focus resources on one city at risk, or spread their efforts across multiple regions? How could they prevent panic while ensuring efficient evacuations? These choices were watched by the Deathworlders, who seemed to value thoughtful, strategic action. Leaders learned to balance risk, act decisively, and trust their teams. Even minor errors could have serious consequences, but every challenge overcame provided valuable experience for future crises. Another important factor was trust. Citizens had to trust the fleet's interventions while also trusting their own judgment and that of their leaders. Mistakes could be deadly, yet hesitation could worsen the disaster. Over time, the Illyrians learned to trust both themselves and the guidance implied by the fleet's presence. Confidence began to replace fear. People realized that their actions, combined with cooperation and strategic thinking, could influence outcomes in ways they had never imagined. As the challenges grew more complex, the Illyrians were tested in multiple regions simultaneously. Energy storms, tremors, and volcanic activity occurred at the same time, forcing rapid coordination. Scientists and engineers used the fleet's energy flows as models for stabilizing critical areas. Citizens coordinated evacuation routes, built temporary shelters, and reinforced damaged infrastructure. Every individual contribution mattered, and the citizens began to see themselves as active participants in the planet's survival, not passive victims. Psychologically, this period reshaped the Illyrians. Fear was still present, but it was tempered by determination, courage, and hope. People realized that survival depended on intelligence, quick thinking, and cooperation. Children watched adults act bravely, learning lessons about responsibility and courage. Communities bonded in ways that would last for generations. The Illyrians began to value selflessness, strategic thinking, and the ability to act under pressure more than ever before. A turning point came when the Illyrians successfully managed simultaneous disasters in multiple areas. Energy barriers and stabilization devices were deployed with precision. Citizens evacuated dangerous zones while engineers rerouted energy flows to prevent destruction. This achievement proved that the Illyrians were learning not just to survive, but to act strategically and collaboratively. They were becoming a civilization capable of handling challenges beyond anything they had faced before. Throughout this phase, the Deathworlder's presence remained a silent guide. Though they did not directly intervene in every situation, their observations and subtle energy manipulations offered indirect lessons. Illyrian scientists studied the fleet's patterns, learning principles of energy management, environmental stabilization, and strategic planning. These lessons were invaluable, teaching the Illyrians how to apply alien concepts to their own technologies and solutions. By the end of this phase, the Illyrians had changed profoundly. They were no longer defined solely by fear or vulnerability. They had become resilient, resourceful, and united. Their society had evolved rapidly under pressure. Leaders, scientists, and ordinary citizens had demonstrated intelligence, courage, and cooperation. The trials had transformed them, showing that even a peaceful, unassuming species could rise to meet extraordinary challenges. The experience also left the Illyrians with practical skills and tools. They learned to interpret subtle cues from the fleet, coordinate large-scale responses, and adapt technology to work in emergency conditions. These lessons would not only help in future disasters but also advance the civilization's long-term development. The fleet had acted as a catalyst for growth, and the Illyrians had seized the opportunity. Looking up at the fleet, still hovering above, the Illyrians understood its deeper purpose. The Deathworlders had come not merely to save a planet, they had come to evaluate, teach, and transform a civilization. Lithra had been given a second chance, but it required courage, intelligence, and unity to truly survive. The Illyrians had proven themselves capable of rising to this challenge. The trials left lasting lessons that would define the future of Lithra. Citizens had faced near destruction, adapted under pressure, and learned to collaborate in ways previously unimaginable. Their courage, intelligence, and selflessness had been tested, and they had emerged stronger. The fleet's presence left an indelible mark, not only on the planet but on the people themselves. They learned that true strength came from unity, ethical action, and the ability to face challenges no matter how overwhelming. By the conclusion of this part, Lithra was no longer just a fragile, endangered planet. It had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and growth. Citizens were stronger, wiser, and more united. The Deathworlder fleet had tested them, inspired them, and transformed their civilization. The Illyrians had learned to face fear, act courageously, and work together under pressure. Survival required not only intelligence and resources but also unity, strategic thinking, and the willingness to rise to every challenge. The events of this period became a turning point in Illyrian history. They had faced the unimaginable and survived. They had learned to make smart decisions, act selflessly, and cooperate on a massive scale. The Deathworlder's presence had changed them, but the growth came from within. The Illyrians were no longer simply a civilization at risk. They were a civilization capable of thriving and evolving in a universe filled with unknown challenges. Here's a 950-word explanation of Part 5 in simple and engaging English. Following your instructions. After the long days of crisis, Lithera began to show signs of recovery. Yet the Illyrians knew that the final phase of their ordeal would test them more than ever. The Deathworlder fleet still hovered above the planet, immense and silent, watching every move. The Illyrians had survived tremors, eruptions, and energy storms. But now they faced the challenge of proving that they could not only survive but thrive under extreme conditions. This phase was not just about protecting their planet, it was about demonstrating their growth as a society capable of handling threats far beyond their imagination. The first major task was rebuilding and strengthening the most damaged regions. Cities that had been partially destroyed by volcanic eruptions and earthquakes now required careful reconstruction. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly to stabilize terrain, repair infrastructure, and prevent further disasters. The Deathworlders provided indirect assistance, their ships emitting subtle energy fields that stabilized certain areas. But the majority of the work had to be done by the Illyrians themselves. They understood that their actions were being evaluated, and the sense of responsibility motivated them to give their best. Communication became the backbone of their recovery. Neighborhoods, towns, and even remote villages coordinated with each other, sharing resources, updates, and plans. Teams were formed to monitor unstable zones, reinforce protective structures, and assist vulnerable populations. Citizens who had previously lived isolated lives were now working in harmony, learning to trust each other and act collectively. This cooperation was essential, as the disasters had shown that no individual or small group could manage such challenges alone. The Deathworlders continued to test the Illyrians' ingenuity and resilience. Controlled disturbances were introduced in select regions, testing how well the Illyrians could respond to unexpected problems. Sudden energy surges threatened infrastructure, while minor tremors destabilized newly reconstructed areas. Scientists and engineers quickly analyzed the effects, adapted their plans, and implemented solutions. Citizens coordinated evacuation routes, assisted in repairs, and helped reinforce barriers. Every successful response demonstrated their growing capability and the lessons they had learned from the fleet's silent guidance. Leadership and decision-making were more important than ever. Illyrian leaders had to prioritize which areas required immediate attention, how to allocate limited resources, and how to prevent panic among the population. Every choice carried weight, as the outcome could determine whether lives were saved or lost. The Deathworlders observed these decisions, valuing careful judgment, strategic thinking, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. Over time, leaders became more confident, learning to trust both their instincts and the expertise of their teams. The final phase also highlighted the importance of courage and selflessness. Citizens frequently risked their own safety to protect others. Rescue teams navigated unstable terrain to save trapped individuals, and families helped evacuate neighbors from dangerous areas. These acts of bravery, often unplanned and spontaneous, had ripple effects that strengthened the entire community. The Illyrians realized that heroism did not always require superhuman strength or advanced technology. Sometimes it simply meant acting with determination, compassion, and courage when it was needed most. During this period, the Illyrians also began to integrate what they had learned from observing the fleet. Scientists studied the patterns of energy stabilization, the precise movements of the ships, and the ways the fleet mitigated environmental hazards. They adapted these concepts to their own technologies, creating new methods to reinforce structures, redirect energy flows, and predict potential dangers. Even without direct communication, the fleet's actions had taught them advanced principles that were now being applied practically on their planet. Psychologically, the Illyrians had grown stronger. Fear was still present, but it was balanced by confidence and determination. They realized that they were no longer passive victims of their planet's instability. They were active agents shaping their own survival. Communities had bonded in unprecedented ways. Children observed bravery and ingenuity in action, learning lessons about responsibility, courage, and unity. The Illyrians' values and culture had been reshaped, emphasizing cooperation, intelligence, and selflessness as essential for survival and progress. A critical test came when multiple disasters struck simultaneously. Energy fluctuations, tremors, and minor volcanic eruptions challenged the Illyrians to act in concert across vast distances. Using the strategies and technologies they had developed, they coordinated evacuation efforts, reinforced vulnerable areas, and stabilized energy flows. Each success was a testament to the lessons they had absorbed and the growth they had achieved. By the end of this event, it was clear that the Illyrians were no longer merely reacting. They were anticipating, planning, and executing solutions with precision and confidence. By the conclusion of this phase, Lithra had been transformed. Cities were rebuilt stronger, infrastructure was more resilient, and citizens were better prepared to face future challenges. The society that emerged was more cohesive, courageous, and intelligent. The Deathworlder fleet had been a constant presence, observing, guiding, and challenging them, but the Illyrians themselves had done the work. They had proven that they could rise to the occasion, not just to survive, but to grow stronger in the process. The lessons of this phase were profound. Citizens learned to trust themselves, their leaders, and their neighbors. They discovered the importance of strategic thinking, collaboration, and ethical action under pressure. Bravery and selflessness became defining qualities of the society. Even the scientists and engineers who had once relied heavily on theoretical knowledge now applied creativity and adaptability in real-world situations. The Illyrians had internalized lessons of resilience, courage, and unity that would guide their civilization for generations. The fleet, still hovering silently above, finally began to withdraw. Its presence had served its purpose. The Illyrians had proven their worth. The citizens understood that the Deathworlders had not only helped save the planet, but had transformed them into a stronger, wiser, and more united civilization. They had been tested, guided, and inspired, and in doing so, they had discovered the potential within themselves. As the fleet departed, the Illyrians reflected on everything they had learned. They had faced overwhelming challenges, adapted under pressure, and worked together like never before. Their society had evolved with new systems of cooperation, advanced technologies, and a culture that valued courage, intelligence, and selflessness. The trials had left them ready to face any future threat, no matter how extraordinary. In these final days, the Illyrians also realized the deeper meaning of the fleet's visit. It was not just about survival. It was about transformation. Lithra had been given a second chance, but only because the citizens proved themselves capable of growth, adaptation, and ethical action. They had learned that survival required intelligence, unity, courage, and the willingness to act selflessly for the greater good. By the end of this phase, Lithra stood as a symbol of resilience and progress. The citizens had faced unimaginable dangers and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united. They had learned to act strategically, cooperate effectively, and rise above fear. The Deathworlder fleet had come as both a challenge and a teacher, and the Illyrians had responded with courage, intelligence, and determination. This final chapter marked a turning point in the history of Lithra. The society had been tested, and it had evolved into a civilization capable of surviving and thriving in a universe filled with extraordinary challenges. The lessons learned during these trials would guide them for generations. They had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious, not just because of the fleet, but because of their own courage, intelligence, and unity. The Illyrians understood that the universe was vast and unpredictable, filled with dangers and opportunities. They had proven that even a peaceful and previously untested civilization could rise to meet extraordinary challenges. Lithra was no longer a fragile, endangered planet. It was a beacon of resilience, courage, and hope, ready to face whatever the cosmos might bring.